Chilean artist with roots going back to Spain. He was born in 1911 and died in 2002. These prints that we have here in the collection, and I'm only showing you 2 today, but we have 4, are part of a 7-print series, all titled Hecatombe de Toros, and they were made in 1971. But they were preceded by a previous print by the name Hecatombe de Toros Agnelli, sorry for the pronunciation, in 1970. So he was kind of working on his ideas for over a year to get to his final print series. There are color lithographs, all have the same 6 or 7 colors, and I'll talk about the process a little bit later when I go into kind of my analysis of the piece. So the reason why I picked Matta to talk about is because I feel that he kind of runs the entire gamut of the exhibition, which is Cubism, Dada, and Surrealism, and he even kind of goes outside of the realm of our exhibition and touches on Futurism and also abstract expressionism. So I think he's a really good example of a 20th century artist who kind of just brings everything together into his pieces. So I kind of want to go in order and talk about how these pieces represent Cubism, Futurism, Dada, and Surrealism. So let's start with Cubism. Matta, when he was younger, he went to Paris. His parents wanted him to be an architect. And so he worked with Le Corbusier and worked as being an architect. A little bit of background information. Le Corbusier was an architect, but he was also a cubist and purist painter. I don't know if we have any in the collection, but so he had this background. And for the longest time, Matta was thinking about space in a physical sense, because he was, talking about architecture and building. And that was also something that the cubists were thinking about: space, breaking it up, how to represent it. And so, what I think is the best example of Cubism in his works are these planar forms here, these squares. Right here, they're green, and they're kind of they're broken up in space. So this one is straight on looking towards us. This one is at an odd angle. This one's horizontal to the ground, and so he's looking at the way that perhaps a wall or a plane of glass can be seen throughout space. But he diverges from Cubism in that you might notice that he doesn't have the modular units, this rectangles, squares, and triangles that Picasso and Braque use in their works. And that's because he isn't a cubist. And he kind of goes from here into Futurism. He has these curvy, linear forms, these lines, these vibrations, kind of to convey movement. And one of the key ideas of Futurism, and the key tenets, was to think about movement in space and movement throughout time. Kind of this very transformative space in a very flat, static medium, which is painting or prints. So another way that he looks at Futurism, besides the kind of vibrations that come through the lines and the forms, is that he's also including these kinds of airplane forms. I mean, they're not exactly airplanes, they're kind of abstract, but the way that I see it is propellers, here's like maybe an engine of a wing, and they're kind of going through space. They're actually cutting through the planes and representing cutting through space and cutting through time. You could also look at it as this is the same plane as this over here, and it's kind of going through the space of the composition at different times. So those are how he kind of shows Cubism and Dada and Futurism in his works. But he also has some influence of Dada as well. So he was really close with Marcel Duchamp, and in 1942 he went to an exhibition where he saw Marcel Duchamp's The Bride Stripped Bare by Her Bachelors Even. It's that glass piece that we talked about in class. And Duchamp thought it was actually better than the original, so he kept showing it. And so there are two ways that I kind of equate that piece to this piece. First of all, I think that the lines in the lines that come from the broken glass in Duchamp's Bride Strip Bare by Her Bachelors kind of influences these lines here and the kind of linear quality to Matta's work. But also the idea that the glass just accidentally broke was, the idea of chance was brought into Matta's work, and so it's a little bit spontaneous in the way that he works his pieces. And that kind of goes on, is allowed by the lithographic process because it allows for a little bit of spontaneity. And you can see that his lines are kind of waxy. He was most likely using a crayon, a lithographic crayon, to get the quality out of his work. And that also equates, one, to spontaneity. You can quickly just draw with a crayon, but it also is kind of childlike. And one of the tenets of Dada, one of the explanations for the term Dada, is that it's what a baby says for the first time, Dada. And so it's kind of going back to that childlike quality that is in some Dada works. And the last way that this relates to Dadaism, and it goes into the surrealism, the way that it relates to surrealism, is that it's political. So it might not look political from the get-go. The title Hecatombe de Toros means the sacrifice of the bulls. So look on the next slide. Here is an abstract representation of a bull, or at least that's my interpretation of it. And the bull is a important symbol in Spanish art, and you've seen it in Picasso, Miro, and it's a proud symbol, it's a brave symbol, but the way that Matta uses it is a symbol of sacrifice and torture and death. These prints were made in the 1970s during the time of the Vietnam War, during the Cold War, and he's making a commentary on that. And this goes into, again, the Dada, some of the Dada artists were also making commentary after World War I about the travesties of war, so kind of relating to Dada as well. But this also goes into surrealism, and I'll explain that in a second. So, Matta joined the surrealist group, officially joined the surrealist group in 1937, so he's officially considered a surrealist. And during that time, that was the second generation of surrealists, like Dali, Magritte. But I would argue that he kind of stands on both sides of the first and second generation. So the way that I see him standing with the first generation of surrealists is that, first of all, his work is kind of abstract, kind of non-figurative, kind of like Miro or Masson in that it doesn't really relate to anything in the real world that you would see in Dali and Magritte. Yes, we do have this image of a bull, and we have these airplanes, but they're not concrete. So they're kind of spontaneous, they are non-figurative, and he kind of relates to the automatist way of spontaneously drawing. But he is a second generation surrealist, and he does focus on their interests in the consciousness, the way that we think, psychology, and so I'm going to read a quote about his work. Whatever stability had previously been afforded by horizon line is here abolished in favor of a sensation of suspension in space. So you see everything is suspended in space, almost kind of like when you close your eyes, everything's just suspended when in your thought process. Having penetrated deeply into human consciousness, Matta recognized that the spirit of life produces vertigo. Man's problem is that of remaining erect in the grip of this force. So he's conveying the chaotic nature of consciousness, of thought, especially in times of struggle during the Vietnam War. He's kind of creating this chaotic feeling with all the vibrant colors, as well as the lines that we spoke about earlier that kind of create this movement quality to these. The second generation of surrealists, also in Breton's, Andre Breton, the founder of surrealism, in his second manifesto, he wrote, "The entire aim of surrealism is to supply social problems with practical possibilities. I really fail to see why we should refrain from supporting the revolution." So this is how I tie in Matta being politically active as like a Dada inspiration to the second generation surrealist movement, because in Breton's manifesto he says that our artwork should serve a purpose. It shouldn't just be for no reason. It should serve a purpose for the revolution. Revolution having an uppercase R. So yeah, he's making a political commentary. And just like Dali was painting dreamscapes, Matta considered his works inscapes or landscapes of the inner mind. So again, second generation. So lastly, going into part of 20th century art movements that isn't included in the exhibition, abstract expressionism. Matta was in New York during the time of Arshil Gorky and the people who were coming into the light of abstract expressionism in New York, specifically the New York School. And we can see also how his work relates to abstract expressionism. It's mostly non-figurative, with little hints of relatable, identifiable figures, but and again, he's also very vibrant, there's a lot of emotion in it, and so, you know, it could go along the lines of kind of the idea of performing, the idea of kind of being part of your piece, creating the piece as part of the action. So, to conclude, I really think that Roberto Matta is a great example of an artist in the 20th century that kind of, even though he is surrealist, because that's the group that he belonged to, he kind of you can look at him through the angles of cubism, futurism, Dada, surrealism, and abstract expressionism. I think that's what makes him really awesome.
Thank you very much.